The fastest way for the federal government to step in is for the president to sign a major disaster declaration. That would free up federal reconstruction funds even before damage occurs. The Texas governor has asked for this, and so have Texas's 2 Republican senators. The president, monitoring the storm from Camp David, is still reviewing that request. Brooke?
Major, in the press conference this afternoon, I was struck by how much the White House emphasized the state and local response and saying we're just kind of going to fill in some gaps here. There's no Homeland Security Secretary in place, a lot of top positions not filled. Does this White House seem prepared to address this first natural disaster of the Trump presidency?
Well, there's a couple of things that the administration says that makes it feel good about this preparedness approach. And let's be honest, look at the Hurricane Harvey and the various ways it could move and the lengthy presence it could have in Texas and Louisiana. Rainfall totals 30 to 40 inches. There's really no adequate way for anyone to prepare for that if that's in fact what happens. Be that as it may, John Kelly is the former Secretary of Homeland Security. He's now the White House Chief of Staff, so he's on top of everything. Elaine Duke is the acting Secretary of Homeland Security. She's monitoring all this from a command center. She has a long bit of experience in disaster and emergency preparation. The president's FEMA director, Brock Long, came from Alabama, where he was FEMA director there. He has a tremendous amount of career experience in storm preparedness and preparation, dealing with state and local agencies. The one thing that is true about all of these disaster responses, the federal government, by law, defers to the state and locality to make its decisions on evacuations and other preparations. And that's really the way this is structured. What has been learned since Katrina is to do things like a major disaster declaration before things happen, so all the federal funds can be released instantly and all that authorization cleared up even before the storm strikes. And that's one of the things the Texas Governor Greg Abbott has asked for. The White House is reviewing that. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that's not approved sometime tonight before landfall of Hurricane Harvey. And then really the test for this administration will be how well has it pre-positioned water, generators, other means by which to maintain communications, and how willing is it, if it's necessary, to bring in federal assets outside of the National Guard, like the military was brought in several days after Katrina to create calm, create order, and to help deal with the after effects. It will be the decisions made after the extent of damage is known that will really be the test of this administration's preparations beforehand and its decisiveness once it knows exactly how bad this is.
And speaking of that follow-up, your piece spoke about the Katrina history, and part of that history was that bad PR photo with Bush in the plane looking at the devastation. He later described it as one of the main regrets of his presidency, that photo. What do we know about President Trump's plans to visit or not visit Texas in the coming days?
So White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said the president intends to visit Texas sometime early next week. There is a reality to a presidential visit in the midst of disaster aftermath. That is to say, a president's presence pulls a lot of resources, a lot of time and attention away from those efforts that are much better focused on the people suffering the effects of whatever has just happened. That's one of the reasons President Bush didn't land in the aftermath of Katrina. He made a decision, I'll just look at it from the sky, which in the history of Katrina made him look somewhat indifferent, and that sense of indifference was deepened not really by that photograph, but by the inept federal response for days and days after Katrina. And so that photo in the moment didn't feel as strikingly off-kilter as it did in retrospect. Why? Because everything that happened after that photo reinforced the notion that the federal government was simply not prepared and not willing to step in and not willing to take on the hardest tasks in the aftermath of Katrina for days and days and days. And that's why that photo came to symbolize an inept federal response, which, as I say in my piece, continues to haunt state, local, and federal emergency preparedness officials to this day. No one wants to see that repeated, and they have tried both through law and best practices to avoid it.
Weather, politics, and optics, we'll be watching them all this weekend. Major Garrett, thanks.
Sure.